It's a really amazing book. There's more than just the financial stuff, but I do think the financial stuff is really what people are gravitating to. And there's a big focus on all the details here. You actually include in your book that WCW was running an operating loss of $10.76 million in 1994. That's according to the official TBS books that you were given access to. And Eric, I bring this up because you've told the story here before that your goal with WCW was to turn a profit. Now, I know that seems silly with the benefit of hindsight, but it had never happened before. They weren't profitable in 88 or 89 or 90 or 91 or 92. And then in 93, when you start to get a little power and start to make some moves, we know that 94 is a banner year. You're going to have a huge opportunity to sign the biggest star in the history of pro wrestling, Hulk Hogan. You're going to put on the biggest WCW pay-per-view in history at that point with Hogan and Flair at Bash at the Beach. So you've got a lot of positive momentum going. Gate records, pay-per-view records, you're knocking it out of the park, but you still ultimately report a loss. But you've told the story before, and I think it bears repeating. Your goal was just to show that WCW could turn profit of $1. And after 1994, showing a loss of $10.76 million, you were profitable the very next year in 1995, right, Eric?
Yes, we were. And I don't remember the number. You know, we beat $1, and it may have been a couple $100,000 is what the profit was or reported. I don't remember. You know, perhaps Guy does. It sounds like he probably does.
I'm going to look it up. I'll check my Facebook.
I'm surprised it's out of the tip of your tongue. But you know, we did make a profit, and that was the goal, but it was also the mandate. Again, you've heard me talk about this before, but when Bill Shaw, after Bill Watts was fired, Bill Shaw held a meeting and basically told everybody either this company turns a profit or Ted Turner himself is going to pull the plug, making it clear that although we knew in WCW that Ted was really supporting us, Ted would tell us that. It wasn't like inferred or assumed. Ted would tell us whenever there was a company meeting or certainly in management conversations that he believed in WCW and it was his intention to keep WCW front and center in Turner Broadcasting. But when we heard from Bill Shaw that even Ted believed that if we could not prove that WCW would be profitable, could be profitable, that Ted, our only supporter, was going to pull the plug. So that dollar of profit, a lot of it was just my ego. I wanted to do something that had never been done before. I liked the challenge. I believed we could do it. But more than my ego and my goal-driven personality, it was about survival. I believed what Bill Shaw told me. I believed that if we didn't turn a profit, WCW was going to go away. That was clear to all of us. We knew there was everybody else, every other Turner executive in Turner Broadcasting wanted to pull the plug. We've known that for years. We had known that for years at that point. But when we got the word that Ted himself was of the frame of mind that either this thing turns a profit or I'm pulling the plug, it wasn't just my personality. It was survival. It was important that we turned a profit. And I was thrilled to be able to hand that first dollar of profit over to Harry Anderson, who was the head of finance at the time.
So when we take a look at the numbers here, Guy, and we're trying to figure out, you know, what's real and what's not, we all know as wrestling fans who have grown up watching WCW, 96 was the best year they'd ever had, and 97 just blew it out of the water. Isn't that the way it felt to you, Eric, that 96 was hugely successful with the creation of the NWO? But 97, man, you had everything clicking on all cylinders. The Sting storyline versus Hollywood Hogan at Starrcade. And we've talked about the finish, but that didn't affect business. I mean, business was a booming in 1997. Fair to say, Eric? I think Eric's muted. But here's what I know. The company achieved a profit of $824,000 in 1997. Guy, that can't be right. That seems silly. That's so low, right? I mean, what happened in 1997? That can't be the real number. This is the biggest, most successful wrestling company of all time in 1997, and they made $824,000. Come on, that's not real.
So let me just close the loop on something we mentioned a few minutes ago. So 95 operating profit, 283,466. So I think
And Eric said a couple $100,000. He was close.
There you go. There you go. So let's talk about 97. And I think this gives us an opportunity. And I really want to make this clear in terms of helping all of the listeners fully appreciate what we're talking about. As was discussed earlier, one thing that's really essential to understand, and this is where you have to differentiate between what is sometimes called creative accounting and the more straightforward issue of fraud, is that WCW was categorized literally in a category called other, along with other things such as the Atlanta Braves, for example. The CNN airport network, incidentally, was in that category. What that meant was, and Eric mentioned, when you look at a financial disclosure on the SEC website, you will see that category other without having insight into that category. But what that meant was that overall, the revenues and expenses that had been generated by those individual entities could look the same in consolidation without actually necessarily reflecting directly the performance of each of those entities, right? So let's just say, for argument's sake, there's 10 companies in a category and they're generating $100 million in revenue. Well, we can report $100 million in revenue, but depending on the priorities of the organization and where we want to allocate certain things and how we want to be perceived as a corporation, we have the ability within accounting rules to move around some of those items, some of those expenses particularly. And in regards to 1997, I'm glad you brought that up. If you look at, once again, the official Turner book, so this is not guesswork. This is not filling in the blanks. This is not someone told me, or I heard in a conversation one day. This is literally based on the official TBS books. They had WCW down as making a total net profit of only $824,000 in the year 1997. However, when you look into those line items, you find some interesting things. For example, under the category of licensing, TBS credited WCW with 1.176 in revenue against expenses of 1.127 million. So that's a net profit line of $49,000 or $942 per week. So let's just take a step back. We're saying 97, the NWO is taking off and everything else, and the company has never been more popular. According to the books, we're making $942 per week. Now, when you add some context to that, you learned that it wasn't until October of 97 that WCW actually had its own designated licensing program. Prior to October 97, the company entered into those agreements under the auspices of another Turner entity called Turner New Media Inc. So that kind of gives you an educated guess as to where some of those revenues may have been recorded. Another thing that I'd like to draw attention to when it comes to 1997 is two more things very quickly. You look at the category of home video, for example, which had typically been around the $2 million mark. All of a sudden in 1997, hottest period in company history, it falls to $856,000 in terms of revenue. Whereas just 2 years later, it suddenly rebounds to $12.1 million. So if you were to accept those figures on face value, you're basically saying that over a period in which WCW's popularity dwindled, it experienced a 14-fold increase in home video revenues, 856K to 12.1 million. But here's the final point, and there's many that we go into the book, but this is an aspect of this whole affair, which, again, unless you actually look at the source documents, I don't even think you'd be able to kind of dream this up. And actually, when I presented this to former Turner finance staff and controllers and people like Greg Prince, who was a WCW controller, people like Dick Cheatham, which obviously a lot of people saw in the Vice series last year, this took them aback, and they were very surprised to learn about what I'm just going to tell you, which is the fact that in 1997, WCW's income was offset by an interest expense of $6.79 million. So let's call it $6.8 million. $6.8 million was used to offset the pop that they were obviously having in 97 in terms of revenue. And in order for that to make sense, if you look at what the lending rates were at that time, the prime rate was like between 8.25 to 8.5%. Basically, that implies, an inherited debt or an operational line of credit of like $80 million. In order for there to be in order for there to truly be that much money accounted to WCW in terms of interest on its debt, that's kind of how it would have to be entering the year of 1997. And when I presented that to former people who would absolutely know, they said that's absolutely impossible. That's there's no way at all that we had operating debt on the WCW books. So what that tells you is within that category of other, okay, we're going to take interest that we're paying on debt that relates to other initiatives in our company. And within this category, which we're allowed to do under accounting rules, we're going to shift that to the WCW books. Why are we doing that? Because we have the revenue to absorb it, the revenue to offset it. And what I have found is just over a 4-year period, there was $23.1 million allocated to WCW as an interest expense. Notice I didn't say accrued by WCW, an allocated interest expense of $23.1 million over a 4-year period. We talk about in the book, there's partial evidence that suggests, the number may in fact be a lot higher. And I kind of go through that with some added context as well. But that is like a factor that I don't think would ever come to mind when you think about, okay, let's be skeptical about the WCW's financial performance. You think about pay-per-view, you think about ticket sales, you think about licensing and merchandising, but I don't think you would think about how much interest was being allocated to its books. And as I mentioned, that number over just 4 years was $23.1 million. And that's all of what I'm saying is a fact. This is factual data from the books that has been verified, that is documented, that is provable. And again, the reader and the listener in this case can do with that what they may.
Don't we all love summer vacation, relaxing, laying out by the pool, barbecues, hitting the beach, doing, well, nothing? Well, how about a summer vacation from your house payments? With SaveWithConrad.com, you can do just that. Reduce your monthly payments by making the equity you built up in your home work for you. You can roll together those high interest rate credit cards into one lower monthly payment, and perhaps access some of that newfound equity to turn your house into your dream home with no money out of pocket. And how about this? You get to skip your next 2 house payments. That's right. You won't have to make your June or your July house payment. You're done until August 1st. Go right now to SaveWithConrad.com. Let my team run the numbers for you for free. There's no obligation, and if we can't help you save some cash, we won't waste your time. And did I mention we're offering a 3-year guarantee right now? That's right. That means if at any point interest rates improve over the next 3 years, you get a free refi. That's right. No new lender fees from us. So you get to save money now without wasting money later when the rates improve on a whole second set of closing costs. Why not go to SaveWithConrad.com and get a guarantee? Save money now and save money later with your friend in the mortgage business. That's me, Conrad Thompson at SaveWithConrad.com. Shoot me an email at Conrad@SaveWithConrad.com. Give us a call at 888-425-0105 or get yourself a quick quote. Even talk to a live person right now at SaveWithConrad.com. NMLS number 2129, equal housing lender. Let's take a summer vacation from house payments at SaveWithConrad.com.